HR Unboxed, the podcast with Natalie and Fay from Rebox HR.
Welcome to the latest edition of HR Unboxed with Natalie and Fay. Hello.
Hi. Good morning, Chris.
On this very hot day in Milton Keynes once again, and today we're talking about the sizzling subject of tribunals.
Oh yes.
This is what you like getting your teeth into, because this is the juicy stuff of HR. But for the rest of us mere mortals, it's terrifying because I've had my fair few of these, and it's really scary. But your job is to sit on the other side of the table and make sure everything is done properly. And for our audience, of a lot of them are going to be business owners and people in management that have to organise this kind of thing. It's so important to get this stuff right, isn't it?
Yeah, so absolute disclaimer here is that it's Faye and I's job to keep businesses out of these situations that we're going to go through today. But being honest, people are so intrigued by it. If you've never been, then it's actually one of the most stressful things that you could possibly ever go through, either as a business owner or someone who's been called to tribunal as a witness. It's incredibly stressful for anybody involved. So we want to kind of show people what it's like in some ways by talking through some of the examples we've got today, and bring it to life a little bit about actually the weight of those very small decisions can turn into something really big.
And I guess it's something that's inevitable when it does happen, because you reach a point where it's only going to go one way and you've got to have a tribunal. Yeah,
sometimes settlement's always an option, so that's one of the areas that we always try and explore before we get to that point, purely because we don't want to put our clients through it. And I've had my fair share throughout my career of being a witness. They are public, by the way, so anybody who's listening who's interested, these are actually public hearings. So if anyone is really that interested, then they can go along to their local employment tribunal service and sit and see how it all kind of pans out if you do have that interest. And I was encouraged to do that as part of my studies, to see how the system works, but secondly, how it kind of all plays out, because you can have two perfectly identical cases and then the judge will rule in favour of one and then another in a different way. So it's all about keeping our eyes on what's actually going on in the tribunal system at the moment, because that's how we then advise our clients on how to protect themselves.
And is it quite common for there to be a live audience for these events?
Yeah.
Do they give their popcorn and drinks provided?
Some people take along their sandwiches.
Do they?
So, yeah. They spend the whole day there going from case to case and things like that. Yeah, there's a lot of law students that go.
I bet, yeah.
So it's actually a really good way to get under the skin of how little things can escalate very quickly, and you'll see some cases which you'll think, oh my goodness, how did that get to tribunal in the first place? But there are others where you're like, oh yeah, this one's going to take a little bit longer. So some of them can last days at a time. Some are just a morning or an afternoon, but some can last even days, even weeks in some cases.
Wow.
So it just depends on the complexity of the case. And yeah, so it's a very interesting area, and it's an area I actually quite enjoy talking about. So today's going to be a really interesting episode for us to run through.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like in there? Does it look like a courtroom, or is it just an office with a table?
Yeah, it's not like you would think in the TV. There's not like a judge and a jury, and well, there obviously is a judge, but there's no jury and executioner, you know. A lot of people will think, oh gosh, it's very much like what we call like a criminal court, but it's not. It's very much almost like a meeting room, but with a panel. So depending on which one you go to, the one that I've been to had like a horseshoe type table, and then the judge and everybody is at the end. So it's a very formal process. So when people choose to represent themselves, I don't think they realise that things like emotion and thoughts and feelings, that kind of emotive piece, isn't really, it's not really part of it. What they look at is the hard evidence of what the process was, how this then has transpired to the situation we see, and then they make a judgment based upon the evidence that they're presented with. So we know of people that we've met during our networking antics over the past few weeks that have actually been to tribunal, and they have said, we don't know how you do what you do because this is so stressful. But when we explain, actually, if you've got the foundations in place and you've got the right people advising you, you shouldn't see that tribunal. The difference is now that they took away the fees for tribunals a few years ago. Back in 2017, that was taken away because the European Court of Human Rights said, well, actually, it's denying access to justice, so they took that away. And now it's a bit of a free-for-all, so it doesn't cost an employee anything to take their employer to tribunal, and they can do that on whatever grounds that they feel are relevant to their particular case. But it will cost a substantial amount of money for the company to defend it, which is usually in the region of about £8,000 to £12,000 before we've even gone in to the tribunal. So any award that's given can only be granted by the judge on the day, and again, that is relative to the process and the evidence that they are presented with during that time.
Okay, so we've got some real world examples here to kind of run through how this whole thing works. And we're going to start off with the curious case of the hotel chef who was sacked after a shout out in front of their guests. So run me through the kind of the context of this. What happened?
So we saw, so again, this is readily available for people to view in the public domain on Google and whatnot, if you decide to want to put this in to have a look at. But the idea around this, and I think what is a really important case, is because, so you had this employee worked at a hotel, and there was an incident between the two colleagues, the two employees that worked there, and what had actually led to this is they were in a relationship and something had evidently gone wrong, and they took it into the workplace. There was a launch of profanity-laced rants towards this other colleague, and this was all in front of guests. You know, this was in, again, their public the public domain, because you had actual guests of the hotel have witnessed to this. You know, it wasn't in a staff room. And essentially, this employee accused her boyfriend of cheating. The outbursts included phrases that I'm not willing to repeat on air because, you know, I don't want to tarnish our clean rating.
You've helpfully written them down on the notes for me, so I can see. And this is mind blowing.
It's really not particularly pleasant words. You know, words beginning with F, beginning with C, so I'll let you use your imagination with that. But it wasn't particularly pleasant, and I don't believe it was for anybody who was witness to this. So there you go. You'd think, well, you know, that is cause for gross misconduct or something. No, so you're looking at it from a management employer side of things. You've done this, you've put us in, you know, in bad light of our customers, probably going to complain. You're sacked. And essentially, this is kind of what happened. There was more context to it, but I think the initial piece under this is that a lot of it ended up being attributed, or at least her legal defence on this, was that it was a reaction due to her underlying anxiety and depression. So this constituted under mental health. And this, unfortunately, wasn't something that the employer or management took on at the time. And this is what led to this case going to court. So it's one of those things that in that moment, with your knowledge of an outburst from an employee, given all these profanities, given all of these awful words, and there's probably children at a hotel, who knows, you think that's cause for dismissal, right? And rightly so, because anybody else listening to this, I'm sure agrees with that.
Well, when you're there in front of customers, in your uniform, shouting that at another member of staff, like something out of Fawlty Towers, it's... like, I can't see how you can say, oh, it was okay because I had mental health issues. Yeah,
and this is essentially what's happened here. So just to put context into what we're obviously talking about, she was awarded the best part of £13,500. Because this got recognised as a disability under the Equality Act, and unfortunately the employer didn't mitigate that into her circumstances. So when we are looking to dismiss anybody, the first thing you need to ask yourself is this person what we would deem to be protected. Are they exhibiting or have anything under disability, mental health, anything that constitutes to the Equality Act or otherwise? There are other protected characteristics out there: race, religion, sex, and bits and pieces, and pregnancy, and all the rest of it. So you do need to take this on board before you make that dismissal decision, because if it's discriminative, there is no length of service involved here. So that could be day one. You could walk in 3 weeks into length of service. If it's discrimination based and you're dismissed, it goes to automatic unfair. So just to put that into context, if you do not take that on board or try and put support mechanisms in place for those dealing with mental health and decide to dismiss and don't, consider that then as a mitigating option, £13,500.
So do you think maybe when people are in this situation, they go and get some legal advice, and the first thing that their advisor will say is, okay, do you have any protected characteristics that we can use as a defence for this that maybe they haven't taken into consideration? So maybe it might not have crossed her mind that, oh, this is an excuse that I can use, until somebody had given her that advice.
Sorry, I'm laughing, or trying not to laugh, because there are actually forums for this and pages on Facebook of people that are trying to proactively sue their employer. So it's, they kind of encourage each other, and they're what I would call Dave HR advice. Dave down the pub, he knows a bit about something. He used to be a union member back in the day, and, there's all of these kind of, I do believe that there is this kind of influence that's going on, and I've talked about it on the show before, where we've had what we call serial claimants, and these are people that essentially make a living out of doing this.
Yeah.
And it's really very difficult for employers to defend themselves, and naivety is not an excuse. Saying I didn't know that piece of legislation or this, that and the other, this is why you need experts that know what's going on. So as we always say, I wouldn't trust myself with my own accounts, being completely transparent with everybody, but I do trust my accountant to do the best job possible, and that's exactly what she does. So I wouldn't guess any of this. So if anybody's listening and going, oh, I've got a bit of a problematic employee and I can see this escalating, it's always best to get that opinion and that advice first before you do anything with that employee. So some of the examples I've seen on that page, because I read it quite well, I'm on it every day, I'm not going to lie. I don't post anything on there, but what I actually do is I read to see what the change is in employee behaviour. I'm very interested in that, and for those of you who've worked with me for many years will know that I've written white papers on this sort of thing. So it's quite interesting, the dynamic that we're seeing at the minute. And essentially we are in a cost of living crisis, so you're going to take opportunity where you can. Secondly, the law, whether we agree with it or not, we'll kind of keep that under our hats. It's not meant to be fair, it's meant to be justified. And a lot of people don't recognise that. So we have to make sure that, one, we're doing the right things by the right processes. Secondly, that we're not winging things and saying things that we shouldn't be. So what Faye and I do more often than not is advise our clients on what they can say, rather than, oh, there's a big exhaustive list of things that you can't say. So it is very, very easy for it to go wrong and escalate very quickly. And some people, they only have to have this perception that they have been aggrieved, rather than it being what's actually happened. So having very robust investigations is a really good starting point. So if ever somebody gets, like, our favourites are always the resignation in haste. And that is where people will resign and they'll say, oh, it's because I've been picked on, or my manager doesn't like me, or they've left me out, or it could be something really minor that could be could constitute a grievance procedure, and the employer goes, oh, we'll take that resignation, thank you so much. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do. So depending obviously on length of service and element of risk, Faye and I's job is then to mitigate that risk. And if you just shake their hand and say, oh, sorry you feel that way, off you trot, then you've left yourself wide open. and that could go to tribunal, and of course that period is going to be extended. So it's currently 3 months minus 1 day that somebody can go to ACAS and get a conciliation process going, but that is going to be extended to 6 months. So you could say goodbye to someone 6 months ago, and then
they're back.
Yeah, so boomerangs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely.
And I guess
something.
you've got to keep all your notes and all the information for 6 months and not throw it in the bin after 5.5 months thinking, oh yeah, done and dusted, don't need this anymore. And then suddenly, yes.
And in health and safety claims, they're 2 years. So it can be something where somebody says, I've had an accident on site or something like that. You've got to make sure you've got the process and the expert behind you to mitigate that risk. So, you know, as I said, naivety isn't an excuse. So if you go to a tribunal and say, oh, well, I didn't know that piece of legislation, the judge is going to throw the book at you. So you've got to make sure that you have done everything you can to protect the business and the interests of that business, because it can go south very quickly and it becomes very, very expensive.
Absolutely. So the thing that's scaring me with all of this is how much of a clue does somebody have to give you that they have mental health issues before you as an employer are expected to take some action to accommodate that? And if they come into work one day saying, oh, I'm just feeling a bit down this morning, is that them kind of telling you, or do they have to formally announce that they're having mental health issues, or should you be proactive and run mental health first aid courses and just try and make sure that you're looking after the welfare of your staff that way?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bits to that. So one, somebody could present themselves with I don't really want to call them symptoms, but it is that they're displaying something of unusual behaviour. So are they being disengaged? Are they being slightly more quiet? Do they have more erratic behaviour? Have they become disengaged? Like, there's a multiple list of things that you could just see that is unfamiliar. You've got to remember, these people work with each other day to day. So if somebody's being a little bit kind of off key, and it could just be a day, we all have bad days, but if this is kind of more consistent and you think, is there a problem here, then managers, it's best for them, or at least best practice for them, to be trained to notice this, because then they can pull up on that before it becomes a bigger problem. So if we look at terms of mental health training, as you suggested, you could see it as important as first aid, as in, you know, because we see an open wound, we treat it, but mental health issues are kind of like that, but they're slightly more hidden, but you're still going to do something. If you had a broken arm, you're going to go to the doctors, you're going to go to the hospital. So there's no difference. If you are suffering from something, only because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't need to be treated, or at least supported then by the workplace. So having knowledge of what those bits and pieces could look like would allow you to better understand how to support and signpost. We're not saying that people become counsellors in their role, because absolutely they don't. If you're mental health first aid trained, then what you are able to do is signpost and, you know, give information and contact details of people that can help. So so that's kind of one element to it. You know, some people are outright and say, I have mental health issues. They just come with that. So it can be completely on the other scope, where, you know, someone isn't just sat quiet, they're actually quite you know, out there about what they're experiencing. So again, to take that on board and then to deal with it as policy suggests. So that's another piece that you could have in play, to have a mental health at work policy, so you actually know the steps in which you are encouraged to help support and deal with these issues.
Yeah. But it is the number one thing where the managers, line managers, business owners will come to us and they'll say, oh, I can't talk to that person because they've got mental health issues. Well, in context, everybody has mental health. Do they have poor mental health? And how do we, essentially, we don't go through like what we call the tick box exercise when it comes to mental health. So Fay is fully mental health first aid qualified, and she did her qualification a couple of years ago. And I would actively encourage that organisations do think about going on those sorts of courses, because they know the right questions that you need to ask the employee. It gets you comfortable with this concept of, oh, I can't speak to them because they've got mental health. Actually, you can. And by structuring a very positive conversation around it and being constructive with it, rather than going, okay, right, so as an employer, we're not going to engage with you because you've got mental health and we're in fear of being accused of bullying, harassment and things like that, these are often things that are used almost as weapons to fire at the employer, and it happens more, Fay and I get these cases multiple times a week. So it's not about questioning the validity of whether that is a genuine case or not. That's not up for us to decide. But what we can do is put the mechanisms in place where you get the balance of both. So one, you're supporting the employee, and secondly, you're proactively dealing with the issue rather than going, oh, I can't touch that because it's not in my remit, or I don't have experience with that. And when you're going into a management role, 80% of your role is managing the people that report into you, and then 20% of that is your usual day job. So you have to kind of make it work, and the more proactive you are and nipping these issues in the bud, the easier your life is going to become, because then you find that you're addressing issues as and when they arise, but secondly, you're being able to really kind of engage with your team and say, well, actually, I'm here for you, but I'm firm but fair. And that's exactly what you want to get to.
And how much of an excuse is it for bad behaviour? So if you know somebody has mental health issues, and then, as in this example, they start swearing at another member of staff in front of customers, it's still a disciplinary issue though, isn't it? Whether they've got mental health issues or not. So was the issue in this tribunal the fact that nothing was done about the mental health issues rather than anything else? But even if it had been done, the thing still happened. Surely that's a disciplinary issue.
Yeah, the one thing that we don't know about this particular case is what that conversation in the room looked like when they initially said, well, we're investigating this particular situation. We don't know if the correct process was followed or anything like that at this point. So one of the things that we need to consider as part of this is the one bit that managers and businesses get wrong is how they mark people down when they're absent. So there's a lot of people that won't do their return to works. All of these things are not HR-y bit tick boxes, these have a purpose. And the more you utilise the tools in your toolkit, the easier it's going to become. So things like your return to works would have been able to establish that there was an ongoing mental health issue, or had they been signed off work by their doctor due to mental health issues, was there anything else that was kind of sitting behind it that we're not aware of in the public domain? So there's a lot of things here that are if, buts and maybes, but these are the sorts of things that Fay and I would be looking at. Is there a history? How are you marking this down? How are you recording these absences? And again, we spoke to someone yesterday, didn't we? So Fay and I were out and about yesterday, and we spoke to someone. They said, oh yeah, we've got an employee who just likes to swap their sickness with holiday. Just stop doing that. So that's, if anything you take away from this show today, is just stop doing that. Because one, they will then argue that they haven't had the rest and recuperation that they need, and secondly, sickness is not holiday. They try and cover it up so that then there isn't this obvious, you've got absence issues, so therefore they can't be disciplined for it. Mr. Manager, you let me have that as holiday, so therefore I wasn't sick. And then when it becomes a problem, then the manager's going to try and address it, but you've already laid that foundation that is perfectly acceptable to do. And then it causes much bigger problems later on, because they could take periods of unpaid leave because they've no longer got any more holiday to use. So having that transparency with the team to say, well, actually, if you're sick, I'm marking you down as sick. And a lot of people go, oh yeah, but I'm not going to get paid for that. And I understand that, but at the same time, that's not conducive to what the operation needs, and it's not doing what's in the best interest of the business or the employee. So keep your records clean is the best piece of advice that I can give you.
Is there a way of doing it above board? So you can have in your kind of employment manual, you get 30 days of holiday a year or whatever. If you want to be paid when you're off sick, that's fine. It still counts as a sick day, but you can have paid sick leave, but then the number of holidays you have available goes down. So it's still marked off as being ill, but you can get paid for it.
Yeah, I think that would definitely blur the lines. I think for a lot of people, maybe not utilising that in the right way, by giving additional enhancement of holiday. Absolutely, we know clients, companies that do that and give extra anyway. So I guess then that is then their discretion, which Natalie kind of identified a moment ago, is discretionary then to whether they say, well, we'll give you a holiday instead of it going down sick. But the problem with that, as you've just rightly said, is that it starts blurring the lines between what is holiday and what is sick then. So it probably would still be unadvised to go at it in that manner. Even if you had an enhancement of holiday, I still wouldn't really be utilising that for sick leave. Like, call it what it is. If you are sick and you can't go into work, then that is sickness absence. Obviously, we do have companies that have enhanced sick pay. So there's that, so they are getting full, half, part pay to what they typically used to. So that's not uncommon, but again, we see that being abused a lot because people just see enhanced sick pay as additional annual leave, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Sicky leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
They actually meticulously plan it, don't they? So with people that have an uplift, so one of our clients offers 10 days sick, guaranteed every year, all of those employees take 10 days.
That's uncanny, isn't it? How weird.
It is.
Yeah.
But you've also got people that will be very accepting of that initially. And then this is where it rubs. This can really impact on things like company culture, and people don't realise that. So, we've got friends that work in certain environments, and, they've got one person who's absolutely to the day making sure that they're getting their levels of sickness in so that they've maximised their time off throughout the year. And this then rubs other people up the wrong way who possibly don't take sickness. So they're like, well, actually, if he's doing it, then I'm going to do it. Yeah. And then you've created an absence problem. But secondly, you're creating a toxic culture by trying to be kind about it. So it's all done from the employer's side with good intention, but as well as I do, rules are meant to be, bent in certain ways and made to kind of create an advantage. But with all the legislation that's coming in and changing next year, employers are really going to have to batten down the hatches, so to speak, to understand how this is going to impact them, because the costs are obviously going to increase with the introduction of statutory sick pay from day one. That's one of the examples. So it's going to be really worth them reviewing what that absence management process looks like. And, of course you can exercise discretion if you want to. So unfortunately, some of the cases Faye and I have to deal with are, where people have got cancer at work and the employer is doing everything that they can to support that person. But if you've got the odd days here and there and it just so happens to be after a holiday or a bank holiday or at Christmas, I'm going to take my full 10 days at Christmas. Then you can start to establish a pattern. And again, it's not questioning the validity, but you have to then piece together what the evidence is telling you. So by recording it correctly on the right platforms and being able to run those reports will, one, help the employer understand how much this is actually costing the business, first of all, because the first thing that we get in the new financial year is, when are we getting a pay rise? That's the first thing. We can't because we've got too much absence. But employees don't see it that way. They're like, well, I've been performing all year and I've been doing a good job. It's not my fault that Dave's off sick every 5 minutes. So you do have to really look at this firm but fair approach. And we always recommend to our clients, don't do anything above the statutory minimum. If you want to protect the company, do it by the statutory minimums and don't offer that uplift, because you will be paying for it in the end. And some companies are super generous, so some of them are paying up to 6 months full pay, and you're like, why are you doing that? Because you know what's going to happen. They're going to come back and work for 6 months of the year and then they're going to go off again, which they proactively do. So we do have to really keep in mind that fairness and consistency. And with productivity in the UK being the lowest in the whole of Europe, we really need to look at what exactly are the problems here culturally. And a lot of the words that our clients are using constantly with us at the moment is entitlement. So they're saying that we're kind of dealing with an entitled generation, and that's really, really difficult. But that's not limited to a particular age group. Some of these cases we deal with the people in their 60s right through to people that are in their early 20s. So it's across the board.
It's worrying, isn't it? Because it's kind of like a disease that it starts off with maybe the younger generation, and then people see other people getting away with it and they think, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do this because it seems to be working for these people. They're just off sick for 10 days of the year and getting paid for it, so
why not?
Why would you not take advantage? Okay, here's our second scenario, and this is a real life incident as well, isn't it? So this is the sleeping security guard who got a £20,000 payout for unfair dismissal after falling asleep for 15 minutes during a night watch. How on earth did he get away with that?
Where do we start? So this particular employee, so as you mentioned, so he was on CCTV watch. He was a controller for that, and he fell asleep during his shift. So straight away, again, as we went, with the first story, you think, well, you fell asleep on the job. Surely that's dismissal.
So did they have a video of him with his eyes closed, sitting there, apparently asleep?
I think that there was clearly evidence based to suggest that he had snoozed. Let's not call it a full-on nap, because what the crux of this story
What's
is
the difference between a snooze and a nap?
Because it was in the view of this particular story, it was unintentional. So if you thought, do you know what, nobody else is on shift, there's a staff room down the hall, it's got a bit of a couch or somewhere to and I've gone and actively took myself there to lay down and go sleep, that's a problem. If you are experiencing it could be even medical issues, other grounds, and you sat there and you're rubbing your eyes and you've had a long day and your eyes go and then you come back to the room kind of thing. I know it was 15 minutes, not like 40 winks, but it was unintentional because he was on the spot in his job and he'd accidentally fallen asleep. So he defended himself by saying he was resting his eyes to avoid dry eyes and stayed awake. He also refused to share medical assessments though. So obviously, again, as I mentioned, if there was a medical reason behind this, obviously it is for employers to say, is there a reason? Is there mitigating circumstances I need to take on board or consider as to why you've done this? Now, when we look at the tribunal ruling for this, it was found, his dismissal was found to be outside of the reasonable response. And the reason for this is, for one, he had a 16-year spotless record. This person had an exemplary length of service with the company with no faults, no issues, no nothing. He was obviously, evidently good at his job. He's been doing it 16 years.
No wonder he was tired.
15-minute lapse, and he was dismissed for it. And that's your problem.
16 years of staying awake and then 15.
I know.
Like that.
But because of that, it was weighed up that there was no actual harm or consequence. So nothing came off the back of that happening. So that was taken into consideration. But what that looked to a tribunal system is it was too harsh a response or too harsh a sanction for what had actually happened. Yeah. And this is what we find. You cannot give somebody with 16, 24, 30 years of service, they do one thing wrong and then they're automatically dismissed. Absolutely not. That's unfair dismissal.
Yeah, we often get asked if these cases can warrant instant dismissal. Yeah. So we're going right back to the 90s with that reference. So instant dismissal, it's just not a thing. So a lot of people go, straight away. If it's under 2 years, then yes, you can technically have that. But if you've got somebody who's got length of service, i.e. over 2 years, then, and they've done something so wrong and that is so outrageous and such a risk to the business, then we would explore options to suspend that person pending investigation if you can't bring them in straight away. Yeah. There's all sorts of things that you can look at to be able to mitigate that risk. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of cases of employer theft from employer at the moment, and we've actually spoken about this, I think, on the show previously, but we are starting to see an increase in these cases. People are becoming desperate, and we heard of a case the other day where somebody with over 10 years of service with the company went and stole a colleague's items. and they just said, oh, I didn't steal it, but it's on CCTV that they did steal it. So, you know, these are the sorts of things that we're coming up against. And
what's the threshold for theft? So presumably if you steal someone's baby bell out of the fridge, that's okay?
Well, put it in context. I've actually dismissed someone for stealing a can of Coke before. Yeah. So
it is annoying when that happens.
Well,
I'm usually the victim.
It was very different. This chap was trying to make friends in the organisation. So what he was doing is he'd created his own little Jimmy device that he could stick inside a vending machine, and then it'd just go ping, and then the can of Coke would fall. And so he made all of these friends. They're all gathered around the vending machine. There's CCTV straight above it, and you can see him like they're all. I mean, if it would have been beer, they would have all been cheersing together. It was quite funny. It wasn't funny, but yeah. And he'd stolen by the time we found out, because we kept coming in going, why is the vending machine open and why is it empty again? And you'd think, well, actually we normally only fill it up once a week, but now we're having to do it like 4 times a week,
and it's not making any money at all.
It's
making a loss.
Exactly. Yeah. So and then we would go through it, and the chap said, yeah, I'm trying to make friends, and you know, this is how I'm doing it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, but theft is theft. Yeah. And by the end of it, he'd stolen nearly £2,000 worth of Coca-Cola, by the way, just for clarity. Those we don't have those vending machines in workplaces. So yeah, it's one of those where people will take opportunity where they can.
Yeah.
And it is very important for businesses to be absolutely clear on expectations. So gross misconduct, if we're really going to define it and chop it down, and if you've got an employee handbook, you'll see this huge list of what constitutes gross misconduct. When realistically it comes down to 3 elements. You've got fighting, threats of violence, and theft. So, you know, those sorts of things. So obviously theft would include fraud as well. So we have a lot of things that kind of, it depends on the complexity of the case, but then, you know, if you've got someone who's stolen thousands and thousands of pounds from the employer, you're not going to say, oh, you know, that seems harsh to dismiss you on your first event.
Yeah,
you know,
and I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? Looking at if this is somebody's first incident, especially during a longer period of service. So it does reinforce the fact that even though it could be serious or a serious rule break, obviously this particular chap in this scenario, he was meant to be on CCTV watch, so something could have potentially happened, but we don't know. It didn't, but it does mean that it might just warrant a warning. Let's go through disciplinary. We don't have to jump straight to dismissal. You know, maybe a rap on the hand to say, oh, let's not do that again.
It comes down to harm and consequence, really. So it's not really a case of, oh, well, you know, you don't know how they would have treated him through that process behind those closed doors. And if you're looking for a reason, which we know some employers do, you know, you can't sack someone because they're weird. Right, so we always say that you can't do that. You have to have a real reason. So Faye and I, when we're handling cases, we really get under the skin of what that is and why the employer is looking to do those sorts of actions. So a very costly tribunal, that one for that employer.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to come on to our next case now. The mysterious case of the NHS nurse who won £41,000 after being excluded from the workplace tea round. Yeah, we find this quite often. A lot of people will be, it's not unusual. So obviously you've got this particular case has made the public eye for obviously it being a tea round. However, we have seen it cases like in our own day-to-day work where people have been left out of takeaway Fridays because they don't work on a Friday, or you've had people that are left out on maternity leave to come in for Secret Santa and things like that. So, and I guess a lot of the time it's not intentional, it's more just not being thoughtless and inconsiderate rather than being deliberately excluding somebody from something. But it's a serious issue. Yeah, it is. It happens. Again, you'll be surprised at how quickly these things can escalate. So in this particular case, the employee ended up resigning in January 2022. She claims that it was following persistent bullying and harassment from a colleague, which related to
ignoring her greetings. So if she came in, she said hello, the person would ignore her and would deliberately leave her out of the tea run. So everybody would have a tea by the time she'd come back from either doing her rounds and things like that. They would have their cups of tea, and they'd say, oh, well, you weren't here. So she took that, again, we come back to that perception piece we spoke about earlier, but ultimately the judge basically ruled in the employee's favour by saying that there was a total breakdown of that trust and confidence, which led to the constructive unfair dismissal. So again, length of service came into play here, but also that the NHS Trust, the failings there were that they failed to act decisively, and that there was an acceptance of this employee's behaviour, as in the colleague who was allegedly bullying and harassing or essentially leaving this person out. So again, we have to be so careful about these, what we'll call, initially they seem quite small behaviours, but they escalate so quickly, and it really isn't worth taking that risk. And people that know Fay and I, work with us or know us personally, know that we don't do the HR for HR's sake. We hate that, because that's exactly what employers hate HR for in the first place. But this is getting bigger and bigger. And by this time next year, we're going to be looking at the biggest overhaul in employment law that we've seen in decades. And if employers aren't ready, we've already got people that are being quite proactive with this, and they're contacting us now and working with us to make sure that they're ready. But if you're not ready and you're not prepared and you're just going to carry on as you are, absolutely best believe that this is not going to go well for you. And it's not that we're putting fear into you, it's just that we know what that demographic is now looking like from an employee's perspective, and we know that small businesses, especially small to medium-sized businesses, are quite vulnerable because they think they're doing things with the best intention, but they're not using the HR playbook to be able to do it properly. And that's where the disjointment comes, and then it causes all sorts of problems where the employee can say, well, I'm aggrieved for X, Y, Z reasons. And that's very similar to what we're seeing in these cases. So
this is the scary thing, that having a clear conscience and not doing anything intentionally nasty is no defence when it's something's happened because you've not been following the right processes and procedures. And the thing here is, it wasn't a boss who was discriminating against this person on the tea run and not saying hello to her in the morning. It was a colleague. But the issue is that the management didn't spot this happening. We don't know whether they complained about it and nothing was done, but even if they didn't complain, you've got to know what's going on in the workplace, haven't you?
Yeah, I think they did. On this particular story, I think she did make it aware and put a kind of complaint forward, but it was upon mediation. So I'm unsure whether it went through formalised channels, but if you mediate, even outside of this particular scenario, if you mediate and you come to some action points or an agreement, you have to follow through on it.
Yeah, and this was intentional as well, wasn't it? Because when this person started, instantly the colleague said, I don't like you. So the intention was there, and the employer didn't exercise the duty of care to the employee that was aimed at. That's where it's gone wrong.
They allowed the behaviour to continue. That is what this boils down to. So, if you see something that is completely inappropriate in the workplace, especially behaviours to, colleagues to one another, then absolutely that needs to get pulled in. You don't let that just run with it. Especially if somebody comes with a complaint, you sit down, you mediate, you have that conversation. What is the problem? Why are you unhappy with said colleague? What have they done to you? Kind of hash it out a little bit, but then whatever, the decisions that come out of that mediation, you need to follow through. And unfortunately, the trust let that down, and they allowed that behaviour to continue to the point where this job was no longer tenable for this particular NHS staff. Therefore, she left, which incited the constructive dismissal piece. Yeah.
But I guess it's quite common for two people that work together to not like each other.
Oh, yeah.
And where is...
we looked at each other then. like,
we have to get on. We have no choice.
Yeah,
now.
we have no choice. We're essentially a brand now, so we can't do that. But no, we're lucky that Faye and I get on really well. But we have seen it in our day-to-day work where people don't get on. We've even had directors that say to us, "My gosh, I don't like Dave. He's really odd. I don't like him at all. He's not a good fit for my organisation." And we're like, "Why did you hire him then?" So there is that whilst people may not all get along, you know, we are human at the end of the day. The law doesn't allow for being a human. What it allows for is clear expectations and management of process and management of those people to be responsible whilst they're in the workplace, which is why I found, you know, the first case that we spoke about, I found that so hard to believe that profanity and the level of language that was used is incredibly offensive to the general public. It is so offensive. So, you know, it's when we're looking at tribunals, it's not always about what the employee has done or what the employer has done. It comes down to the first thing they'll look at is the process. What has been followed? What have you done to proactively prevent this from happening? Because if you haven't proactively prevented it from happening in the first place, or you don't have the training in place, we're seeing that with sexual harassment. You know, it's the sexual harassment cases are massively on the rise. So Faye and I having the displeasure of dealing with some very uncomfortable situations. And I say that it's displeasurable. This isn't funny to people. You know, people are actually living through these experiences and essentially hating what they do, and even being prevented from going into other workplaces because their confidence is shot because of that experience. So we have to be the best version of ourselves as companies, as our brands, as our organisations, and as individuals. The way that you lay out what that term looks like is by having the right policies and procedures in place and saying, do you understand that this is how we expect you to behave while you're here? Yeah. Do you understand this is what we want from you in terms of the management of the two-way contract? So if they're not managing that piece from the get-go, then you're going to have a problem. So this is why a lot of companies now are bringing back the old school company induction. And they're doing that face-to-face in person and saying, well, this is what our values are. This is how we operate. These are our key clients. You know, that they're really bringing it back to that human approach where we're all together in a room, so you kind of go in as a cohort and things like that. And I actually think it's quite nice. I'd welcome back the induction to small businesses any day. I think it's a great way to really get integrated in the organisation, but without it being too HR-y.
Yeah. Integrated into the team.
Yeah,
because we get that, you like you said, Chris, you know, not everyone's going to get on, but I think going back to the title of this, you know, gosh, 31,000 for being left out of the tea run. Everyone runs to think, oh, when was I left out? You know, what, I could do with a new car. You know, it can seem quite minor. It really can seem quite minor. But I think the biggest, you know, bit to take away with this particular scenario is that it does mask a broader workplace problem. It wasn't just that. It wasn't just the tea run. And I think that's important to kind of get that message across with this. I mean, it was unresolved conflict. Yeah. And it was something that was persistent. And it's something that this employee had, you know, challenged in her day-to-day for a good period of time that left the job being no longer, you know, tenable for her to do, which led to a costly tribunal, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Is this what they call microaggressions? So it's lots of tiny little details that add up to a picture. Yeah. And the straw that breaks the camel's back might be something like, oh, you didn't say hello back to me after this months of just subtle hostility.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think a lot of the time, if you have a look online for any kind of cases, I mean, it might even come through on newsletters into your email or even on the TV, and the headline is unbelievable. You think, no way, they got money for X. It's never just that one thing. As you know, I'll go back to this, you know, left out of a tea run. It wasn't just that. She didn't get 41,000 because of that one issue. This was a multiple. This was a bigger scenario. This was a wider problem that led to this, you know. But obviously the press play on things, don't they, to seem that something minor got paid out for. It's not that at all.
No, and the problem with this particular case is that this then led to an unfortunate breakdown in that person's confidence massively, to the point where it severely impacted their mental health, which they had medical evidence of. So it's one of those where, again, it comes down to what people perceive as, can't you have a bit of banter in the workplace? Jane loves it that we leave her out of the tea run and she has to go and make her own tea. Do you see what I mean? People will hide behind this cloak of, okay, it's just banter, and it's not. Banter just doesn't have a place. It doesn't have a place in the workplace anymore. You've got to kind of, yes, you can have a bit of fun with your work, but it's going to get to a point where there's so much legislation around it. Yeah. People are wondering how they're actually going to talk to each other whilst at work without fear of offending someone.
Yeah.
Is there a point where banter's acceptable? Is there a certain level of banter? Because I guess it depends on how the other person feels about it, but you can never really know how somebody's feeling, because they might be putting a brave face on it and secretly cringing inside.
Yeah, I think you need to be incredibly careful with banter. We're not here to say don't have a laugh, don't have fun with your workmates, essentially, but I think it's just knowing where to toe the line with things. It's only a joke if both parties are laughing, so when the other side isn't, that's a problem, and that's where you need to stop and really think about what you are saying. If this comes down to a race, religion, or any other kind of thing that we don't joke about, then absolutely don't say it. Maybe think, what's the reaction, how is this going to land with that person, because how well do you know them? Because so much can get tolerated, as you mentioned before. It's the little things, and then the last thing, a joke gets said, but you've taken all the previous and you've laughed along with them. So again, if you're on the receiving end of this, if you don't like it, then speak up and say, that's inappropriate, I don't like that, because then the other person knows. So again, it's just having that kind of open communication. I mean, we do have a bit of data around that. And we can tell you that the cases for workplace banter alone, so there was 57, so nearly 60 employment tribunal claims in 2024 alone reference to inappropriate banter. So that is reflection of the growing tension between that professionalism piece and what's accepted. So if you've got nearly 60 cases gone to court with workplace banter, I'll probably avoid it. Yeah. Honestly.
But I mean, to me, the word banter means not intended to upset somebody. Yeah. Like, it's if it was a nasty comment, then that's a nasty comment. But banter implies you're saying something that you think is funny, but it might be laughing at somebody, not with them.
Exactly, and this is the point you've just even mentioned yourself, because you thought was funny. So how that again lands with that person that it's kind of toward, or in the company of, they might not, especially if it's to do with, as I mentioned before, like culture, religion and bits and pieces. You might think, if you're external from work friends, that is funny, but you don't know who else is in the room, and you don't know the sensitivity of each individual, and what they've previously been open to having, unfortunately, because people don't always say the nicest things, so it might be quite triggering for them.
They do, yeah. So there's also this kind of, you've got to be aware of the workplace relationships.
Yes.
So there's a lot of people that might be working with friends and family in some businesses. We see that quite often, don't we? And then the problem with that is that they may have banter amongst themselves, but then somebody is offended by what somebody has said to the other person because they don't agree with it for some reason, then they can then raise that as an issue themselves, even if it's not been sent or said to them directly. So it's a very interesting
collateral damage from banter.
Comes down to perception, doesn't it?
And that's really big at the minute with sexual harassment in the workplace. Yes. So if somebody makes a joke, say if you and I, Chris, were having a joke and we said something that we didn't deem inappropriate, but it was to do with that context, Natalie overheard our discussion. She absolutely could go forward with a grievance for it, because it comes under that sexual harassment at work policy.
Even though we're not even talking to Natalie, she's just eavesdropping on our private conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we're in a different room and she's got her ear against the wall with a glass, is that still?
I'm still listening, Chris. I'm still listening.
She's always there.
I think that the walls have ears. We've got to think along that lines. But I think it's just being fair. I think you've just got to be mindful. Please just think about what you're talking about and in what company, who can hear. You don't want to talk and gossip about someone and someone's too feet away from
I know,
you.
that's awkward when that happens.
And even
So-
with third parties as
Yeah.
well. So if Faye and I were talking and then you were in the room, then you are protected from third party harassment. So, you can say, I don't like how those HR girls are with me in the studio. It's getting a bit much now.
It is getting a bit much. Yeah.
Oh, bless you, Chris. Thanks for putting up with us
Yeah.
every episode.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
The line is being reached. I'm going to snap at some point.
Oh, no, you love us, really.
Oh, of course. And we've got interesting stat about tribunal claims to do with the menopause that have really shot up recently, haven't
Yeah,
they?
so we haven't actually touched upon this much, but I think it's a good talking point for probably a future episode, because obviously, so many people obviously go through this, 50% of a workforce, predominantly being female. So they have actually tripled in just 2 years,
Wow.
which is quite incredible considering, I don't want to say it was low on the radar, but I think it's becoming increasingly important that employers take on board now what their obligations are for those experienced menopause symptoms in the workplace. So just for some stats for you, so tripled in 2 years, 204 claims between January and March 2005 compared to only 64 in 2022. That's a 319% increase. Yeah. So we're starting to see a different variety, should we say, of tribunal claims. So where we've said, we've had things of dismissal and unfair and bits and pieces, we actually have this kind of new uprising of menopause claims where they don't feel supported in the workplace. So it's becoming increasingly important to have those right policies in place so we can actively support employees.
Yeah.
I think it's the thing with the menopause and with mental health is
Yeah.
it's something that's getting talked about more than it ever used to be in the past, and it's making people more aware of the fact that it's not something you should just accept discrimination about, because it is important, and maybe this stuff's been going on for decades, but only now people feel that they can come forward and actually complain about it.
Yeah.
People are much more aware, aren't they, since COVID? They're much more aware of how they're feeling because they've spent all that time in isolation. It's given people time to think.
Yes.
So a lot of organisations actually did close and cease trading for a while whilst they figured out the logistics of how this was going to work. Because initially it wasn't all Zoom calls and team chats, was it? It was very much, right, well, we don't know what we're doing, so we're going to have to stop working until we know what we're doing. So a lot of people had a lot of time to kind of think about their lives and how they were feeling, but also it comes down to this increased awareness. Now we've got the science that backs up the data, so now we have all of that in place. What we now have is this knock on into organisations, and it's no longer a case of people having problems and leaving them at the door. They very much bring their problems into the workplace, and therefore that impacts on the employer's need to exercise that duty of care to not just to protect themselves but to support people in the right way, which kind of feels like it's just an additional responsibility upon responsibility for employers now. So it's very difficult. Some of the clients that we work with have actually started downsizing their workforces purely because they see it as too much hassle to employ people, and recently we've had the unemployment figures come through, and that is reflective of these new unemployment figures. So we have keeping a very close eye on what this data means for businesses, and we will obviously keep touching upon this in future episodes because we think it's so important for people to understand where the future of work is actually going, rather than it just being another mental health headline or another menopause headline or a sexual harassment case or cups of tea runs. It's going to be a lot more, actually, let's get under the skin of what is actually going on and how this actually plays out when it comes to workforces. So yeah, we will be doing a lot more on all of this stuff, and we're very open to what the audience has to say, or if they've got immediate concerns, we'd be more than happy, because more than likely other people are thinking that too. So if anyone's got any questions, do submit them to us, either on LinkedIn or via email, which is where some of the people come through to. Just let us know what's going on, and hopefully we'll be able to help answer or address any of your concerns in the next episodes.
Fantastic. Well, I think we covered a lot there, and it's always handy to have it in a podcast because you can go back and listen to the bits when it's important that that are relevant. But thank you very much. What are we going to be talking about next time? Do you know yet?
Oh, I think we are going to be talking. Well, I think it's going to be good to kind of follow on from this conversation because we're anticipating a bit more data coming through.
Yeah.
But we're open to our audience to suggest. So if they want to put forward what they'd like, very much like we've done in this episode, we've got. I think we've done a pretty good job on tribunals.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot there. So if you can let us know what you'd like to hear us talking about in the world of HR and related issues, and obviously lots to talk about with all of the changes in legislation that are coming forward. So making sure that we stay on top of all of that stuff. Thank you very much for your time again today.
Thank you very much for having us.